Yo, 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 yo. What is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today, oh man, do we have a hot take for you. We're going to be touching on the Season 1 map, the Season 1 Plus map, until it gets phased out. Season 2 map, I'm going to give you my pros and cons on each, but really the bigger point of this video is going to be to touch on how these maps, some of them, are impacting the game in a negative way. How the challenge and one of the biggest hurdles right now across the entire game is how the Season 1 map looks and how the Season 2 map looks. Because these are things, and we're going to touch on these, on how they are creating the highest percentage chance to have a negative impact on the player experience. And bear in mind, this isn't, as when I usually do these types of videos, this is never going to be a slight at the game as a whole or the developers. These are simply to talk about having an understanding on what those opportunities are. Why are they actually negatively impacting the player experience, or why do they have the highest percentage chance to do so? So hopefully, if the developers or if others or anyone really who watches this video can get a good understanding and hopefully an appreciation for the explanations that we're going to be providing. So, without further ado, let's start with Season 1. We're going to go Season 1, we'll do Season 2, and then we'll come back to Season 1 Plus to kind of finish it out, because in my opinion, I think the Season 1 Plus map thus far is the most well-designed map out of the three that they currently have. So, with Season 1, the challenge, let's start off by just kind of giving you an overview. So if we go here, and you'll take a look. So let's start in Season 1. You basically get randomly populated into one of the 7 outside starting zones, right? So Kaltia, right, you have the mountain range that you can't pass here. So you have Kaltia, Sofrostia, Nivola, Darlin, Forgotten Lands, Zoland, and Burning Lands. That makes up your Zone 1. Zone 2, Hollandale, Lorcan, Ogoru. Zone 3, in the middle, Atherin. Now, the challenge here with Season 1, and really what I feel is the biggest impact, is that, and really it's only one change they need to make to this, right? And then I think they would be in a better position, because with Season 1, you have to understand that it's more of an introduction to the game, right? It's really not something that, and I'm going to hit on the biggest point here, which is why, and this is just kind of to say that this is kind of another like passive, indirect contradiction where the game is, and again, I'm going to make another video on this, but Call of Dragons really is at this point where they're having an identity crisis. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So, the one change they need, that they should make, I should say, without doubling down on that, is that the way that Season 1 operates is you end up having the Level 1 passes between adjacent Zone 1 regions, so Sofrostia to Kaltia. The Level 1 passes open up first. This should not be the case. Level 1 passes should open up last, right? This was something that I felt Rock always did well, especially for their first few KVK seasons. Even though, yes, this is not a KVK, the idea being is that your Zone 1 should kind of be your safety zone until the end of the season, right? If you really want to view it that way, where you have the Level 2 passes that open up first, going into Zone 2, then you have the Level 3 passes that open up, going into Zone 3, and then you have the adjacent Level 1 passes that open for your connecting Zone 1 regions. Let me explain what the challenge, like why this is so hurtful to the new player experience. And this is something that I just think, and again, I always have to word this appropriately. If you're a developer of a game, right, you are a developer first, not a player first. Yes, you may play the game that you are developing, but usually you're playing it in a very isolated state, a very kind of closed off state, meaning that you're not really playing the game once it's, and again, I'm not saying that they don't still, and none of the developers obviously still play the game now, but their approach to the game is from a developing standpoint. It's not from a playing standpoint. When you come in and you download the game off the App Store, you're coming into the game from a player standpoint, right? The majority of the time, because you're usually a player first, like myself, right? I'm coming in as a player. The developers are coming in as designing it in a way that they had initially or originally intended. Now, as we know, there are multiple, let's just say, things out there in the world that were created but ended up being used in an entirely different way than what was originally intended. And that's okay. But there has to be a level of understanding here. The reason why this is such a hindrance is because if you are a new player, and let's say you have a group of players or an alliance or a group of alliances that comes in, and let's say they just want to wreck face. They just want to wreak havoc. They want to terrorize. They want to attack anything and everything in sight. Or they just want to go in and just control all of the behemoths and all the structures. They want to get all the best villages, etc. Right? They could do that even without attacking you and just defending. Bear in mind, you do not have to go out and attack someone in order for them to have a very limited or negative new player experience. You could just simply cut them off from advancing in zones. You could cut off the behemoths and or resources that they could get within the region that they reside. You could go around and attack them or attack their strongest players. Or you can go out and poach and recruit players from their alliance, from active alliances, because you're just forcing this type of mega alliance fight. I mean, those are at least 4 major things that can happen. Now, bear in mind, the majority of those really can happen or could be allowed to happen because you're allowing for Zone 1 regions to be accessed early on in the season, in the very first season, I might add. That is why that can quickly turn into a negative player experience, because in the first season, it's an introduction, right? Bear in mind, the new player experience, it's not like there's a guide, right? There's no tutorial that they give you when you're coming in as a brand new player to a kingdom builder. I don't know any kingdom builder out there on the market to date that has ever, only game I know that has attempted to do something like this was Infinity Kingdom, where they had some type of like a new player handbook that they started working on in game, which I actually thought was pretty genius. And I think there was obviously some good opportunity there to keep expanding and improving, but the idea behind it was good because they recognized that when you're coming in as a new player, you don't know anything. And there's no guidelines. There's really nothing that tells you, as an example, if you want to go and attack a behemoth, you should probably join an alliance. There's no tooltip for that. And I'm talking really basic stuff. The challenge, I think, when you're a developer and you are coming into the game is that you're thinking about the mechanics. You're thinking about how the system operates. You're not really approaching it from how is a player understanding what's actually happening and what are the type of universal or common denominator things that a new player is going to be doing throughout the course of a season. And that's really where I think the major opportunity is, because there's nothing like that. Ever. I mean, really, there's nothing like that in any kingdom builder. Like I said, with the example of IK, who was doing something a little bit like that, but that was a little after the game was released as well. So, because you have these 4 major impacting areas that can factor into Season 1, with the majority of those, right, those 2 to 3, being able to be taken advantage of within the beginning of Season 1, throughout the Zone 1s, that's where it creates a negative new player experience. And this can lead to things such as player drop-off, right? Which is one of the major areas that we often talk about, where players are just restarting their accounts or they're lowering down their playing activity. That usually, if they're lowering player activity, most of the time it typically goes into player drop-off, or people that are just quitting the game. Maybe they come back, or people that quit the game and they just uninstall. Whatever camp they may fall under, right, for that particular group or for those individuals, it's not a good look, right, when you think about it like that. And so this is why when you often hear me do these type of topical videos where you're trying to get a better understanding of how a kingdom builder operates, you have to understand it from the player perspective, which really factors into a player's psychology. Why do they do the things they do? Why don't they do the things they do? Why do they complain about the things they do? Why do they love the things they do? Having an understanding for this will really, I believe, is kind of the untapped potential that from at least all of the kingdom builders I've seen released thus far, that I have played or have experienced myself, which is quite a few because I do love testing out new kingdom builders. To me, that's probably the biggest aspect that I really feel developers are just uninformed or unaware of, right? They're just not fully versed in that area. And I think that if they were, we would probably see different things happening, some different things happening in games within this genre. Okay, now let's move on to Season 2. So for Season 2, we will go, and I'm going to give a brief rundown because I have already kind of talked about Season 2. So we will give you kind of a quick overview. I really wanted to dive more into Season 1 because to me the Season 1 map has quite a few opportunities there, but there's reasons why you have to understand more, particularly that factor into what those opportunities are. So we'll wait for the Season 2 map to load. We'll briefly talk about that because, like I said, we already kind of did an expansive one, so I'm going to give you kind of a quick TLDR here. And then we're going to get into the Season 1 Plus map, which is probably my favorite map thus far out of the three. Okay, so let's go here. Now, with the Season 2 map, the biggest thing for me with the Season 2 map is I like the design, right? Or sorry, I like the layout. Let me say that, like how it visually looks with the changing landscapes. I love the asymmetrical approach. I'm actually becoming more of a big fan of these style maps compared to something that's purely symmetrical, like for what you would find in games like Infinity Kingdom, Rock, others. But the challenge here is that, one, I want to applaud because I do like this type of idea of that they're doing with the runic statues, which I think is kind of like the Dark Ruins that they do in Rock. I'm sure it's probably titled something else. I'm just forgetting the name right now. But it's essentially where you go in and you could send one troop in to go and fight. However, I believe they need to expand the area. I think the runic statue area is just too small. And let's see if I can show you an example of this as well, if we can zoom out. And I'll show you what I mean here if we're able to view one. Dun, dun, dun. Here we go. So here's the fighting area, right? This is pretty dang small, right? So when you look at it, you can see it's not that big. And then you basically have like two donuts, right? It's like a donut hole. It's like an original glazed, right? You have the ring on the outside, and then you got the hole here in the middle. So really what they need to do, to simply put, is they just need to expand this. They need to make this bigger. I would say probably need to make this about 3 times bigger. That's the minimum. And when I say bigger, I mean width. They need to make the width. I'm okay with the circle, but they need to make the width 3 times bigger, and then inherently this needs to be 3 times bigger because it's just too small. Especially when your unions are allowed to go in as well. I mean, you could have, anywhere from 100 to 200 marches in here at one point in time. Even if you're only allowing one march in, it's just too small to operate. It's too thin. So to me, I like the idea of this because but this should be a secondary focus, right? This is a mini game. This isn't the main attraction, right? Then the second thing they need to do, that I would like to see them do, is to put these runic areas somewhere else. They need to have kind of a neutral PvP area, even if it's smaller than the Season 1 Plus, because I did feel the Season 1 Plus neutral area was a little bit too big. But again, we'll talk about that when we get there. That's really what they need to do, right? So if you're talking about adjacent regions, ideally have something like this. Go from here to here, and then go from, maybe like here to here, as an example. And then this area is your kind of neutral adjacent Zone 1 PvP area. And then you move the runic statues up here to the corner, and then that way you can kind of access it from here, or you can just access it at the top. This way, and if you create this in each zone, you can have a neutral PvP area that you're fighting over, and maybe it can have a different type of objective. Maybe instead of a Dominion style one, maybe at certain times it goes off kill points, right? Whoever can get a million kills in an hour or something like that, right? Really be creative with it. You have opportunities here. So again, that's what I'd love to really see for Season 2. I just think the runic statues need to be moved, and they need to create kind of neutral Zone 1 or neutral PvP zones. at each zone, neutral PvP areas at each zone that you can access in Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3, and then, Zone 4 is obviously probably going to be the big fighting. But that's, I think, really the two opportunities that I'd love to see them do in Season 2. I think that would drastically improve the overall season experience, because really, for the most part, what we're seeing right now in S2-1 is where you're just not really having any fighting. There's probably not going to be any fighting until Zone 4. And again, this is why it's challenging for me, right? Because, and let's go look at season. So now we're going to take a look at the Season 1 Plus map so we can show you. Right, so we can go to like 103, I think, possibly. Yeah, let's do 103. So we're going to load up a Season 1 Plus. And what you will notice when we load this up is, and this is one of the questions to ask, which is, how do you go from Season 1? You make adjustments and improvements on the map in Season 1 Plus, right? But it's really more of an upgrade. It's more, well, I don't even know if it's more of advancing the story, right? So Season 1 is the introduction. It's understandable why the map is what it is, despite the opportunities we mentioned. But then Season 1 Plus allows for you to kind of get your first taste of a merge season with other kingdoms, and also some more PvP areas, right? So here's the Season 1 Plus map. Now, even though it looks the same as the Season 1 map, there are some inherent differences. Specifically being that with Burning Lands, right, you can now go into So Kaltia is the neutral. This is the neutral Zone 1. Oops, hang on. Let's go back here. So Kaltia is one of the neutral Zone 1s. Navola is the other neutral Zone 1. And then you have Forgotten Lands. So in S1 Plus, you can choose to start in Sophrostia, Burning Lands, Zoland, or Daraland. You cannot go from Burning Lands to Zoland, right? So Daraland and Zoland can go Forgotten Lands. Daraland and Sophrostia can go Navola, and then Sophrostia and Burning Lands can go Kaltia, right? Now, obviously, with Daraland, you can choose to go Forgotten Lands or Navola. Sophrostia, you can go Navola or Kaltia. You have some flexibility options. But if you start Burning Lands, you can only go Kaltia. If you start Zoland, you can only go Forgotten Lands. Now, the reason why this, to me, is an improvement. Right now, again, this isn't the ideal state. The ideal state is really what I just talked about in Season 2, right? That's kind of advancing and upgrading the situation more. Season 1 Plus built on what Season 1 map introduced. And then they said, okay, that's our level 1. Let's go to level 2, and we're going to introduce now a little bit more PvP, right? With the also additional access of Atherin from, I think it's like the level 4 pass or level 4 or 5 pass that you go into Atherin from Burning Lands and also from Navola. So you have, to say all of this, a more PvP enticing map for Season 1 Plus. But then you get to Season 2 and it just feels like it's a backpedal, right? As though they didn't look at what they did, or maybe they didn't analyze or appreciate what they did in Season 1 Plus and build upon that for Season 2 to kind of take us to level 3. Now it feels like we just went right back to level 1, right? Or even, you could even argue maybe worse than that, right? You're like kind of at like level 1.1 or like 0.9 or something. So to me, again, the Season 1 map I think is ideal. Again, with those opportunities we mentioned. I love, and this is the thing, I love the Season 1 Plus map. I really do. I personally would not change anything about the Season 1 Plus map, right? I think they learned from Season 1 on the challenges of allowing for Zone 1, because you have to understand that in this map, you cannot go all over in the Season 1 Plus map, right? This is the kicker. You cannot go into adjacent Zone 1s. So Sophrostia cannot go into Burning Lands. Sophrostia cannot go into Daraland. You can't go into another starting Zone 1 region, right? But if they were able to recognize that and do that, why not then go back and make the change in Season 1? That's where the contradiction parts really kind of get to me. And again, this is not a slight on the developers. This is not a slight on the game. This is asking the question of if the developers thought to themselves, whether it's on their own or they got the feedback and then implemented the ideas and the features, to go from Season 1 to Season 1 Plus, where they then did not allow players to invade starting Zone 1 regions. Why not go back into Season 1 and just change the Augur Stone so level 1 passes open last instead of first? To me, that's where I kind of feel like we're in this identity crisis mode, right? And so again, this is all to say, and I'm going to really, because there's more things than this that really fall into this kind of identity crisis sphere that is Call of Dragons right now, with some of the areas that just, I don't want to say don't make sense, but it's like one thing's here and one thing's on this side, and it's just they're on two different sides of the fence when you're thinking about certain features that are in the game that contradict each other, right? So again, this is all for me to say. I hope you, first and foremost, I hope you guys always enjoy these kind of TED Talk topical moments here, because these are things that I just find incredibly fascinating when we think about the direction of where a game is going. Where did it start? What changes were made? What are we seeing now? So I'll end it here, but I do want to pass the question to you. How do you feel about each of the maps? Do you agree or disagree with the opportunities that I outlined for each of the maps? Do you feel that maybe some of the maps should be different? Again, I love Season 1 Plus, right? I wish they would keep this in, and it would go Season 1, 1 plus 2, 2 plus 3, 3 plus, right? To me, it just feels like it's going to create more work for them, unnecessary work for them, where, like we talked about in one of the previous videos, where now they're going to have to come up with a Season 3 map, right? And they're going to have to do that fast. So, instead of kind of buying themselves more time, right, it's kind of like they've just expedited how quickly they now need to kind of get the new map out, right? Which is, I would imagine, just kind of more unnecessary pressure you're putting on the development team. So anyways, with that, let me know what you guys think in those comments down below. That is going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.